All right, it's 10 o'clock right now. Thank you everyone for joining us for the discussion for Global Strat View. Today we're going to talk about the Indo-Pacific strategy coming from views from different corners of the world, including from the US, India, Japan, Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, and to really getting a full picture of what this Indo-Pacific strategy is. And first of all, thank you for the Global Strat View to host this event. I'm your moderator, Huang. I'm the House Correspondent for the Voice America's China branch. And joining us today, our panelists includes Asanga, who is the International Security and Geopolitics Analysis and Strategic Advisor, also the Senior Fellow at the Millennium Project in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Asanga, for joining us.
Thank you.
And we also have Joyce Ling, who's the Professor Ling is the Department of Diplomacy and International Relations of Taiwan's Tom Kang University. Thank you, Professor Ling.
Thank you.
And next we have Masahiro Okoshi. He is the Washington Bureau Chief for the Japanese media, the Nikkei. Masa,
Hello. Good morning.
Welcome. And last we have Ambassador Ashok Sajjanha. I hope I didn't pronounce your name correctly. And Ambassador is the India's former ambassador to Kazakhstan, Sweden, and Latvia. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I would like to have each of our panelists keep your answer within 3 minutes because we have a lot of matters to cover. So first, of course, I want to go to Masa first because we know the Indo-Pacific strategy was formulated by the late Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. So when Shinzo Abe, he introduced the concept of Indo-Pacific, how was it conceived in Japan and received in Japan, and also received in the Japanese public?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Well, first back to 7 years ago, it was in August 2016 that the late former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe proposed the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. If you remember what was going on back then, you may better understand this strategy. I believe that there were three things. First, the strategy against the rise of China. This is in tandem with the question of what kind of diplomatic philosophy Japan proactively promotes to the international community. At the time, China was attempting to unilaterally change the status quo in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, and also was strongly promoting its One Belt, One Road. Of course, neighboring countries, including Japan, were enticed by China's economic power, but also felt threatened by its coercive attitude. So Japan, Prime Minister Abe, proposed the idea of developing the region into a stage where freedom, the rule of law, and the market economy, rather than force and coercion, would be emphasized. The second is the strategy for change in the United States. 2016 was the presidential election year. At the time, very few Japanese predicted that Donald Trump would be elected, but no matter who becomes the president of the United States, the international community will be affected by its strategy. And there was also concern that power vacuum would be created in the region for some time after the presidential election. So to prevent a power vacuum from creating a confusion, Japan aimed to firmly establish an ideal flag in this region. And number three is the strategy for economic prosperity. Although the focus tends to be on the side of the national security aspect, it's originally integrated with the economic partnership strategy. the Indo-Pacific region, which extends from the US to Africa, is core of the global vitality, home to more than half of the world's population. On the other hand, it's a complex region that is undergoing a dramatic shift in the balance of power. That's why Japan's proposal was to maintain an international order based on the rule of law, not by one superpower, but by many countries working together and prospering together. And now 7 years have passed since then. I believe that the concept of the strategy itself is shared among Japanese, public Japanese opinion leaders. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Masa. Next question, I will go to Asanga. Masa already talked about when the strategy came out, that was during the U.S. presidential election. Of course, when then hear President Trump talk about Indo-Pacific strategy, and then of course President Biden has his own strategy into Indo-Pacific as well. So can you tell us when and how the United States adopted Shinzo Abe's vision on this Indo-Pacific, and how are other international efforts that United States is also involved in the region, including Quad, AUKUS, play into this strategy?
Well, thank you for having me. Like my former speaker who was clearly articulating the Japanese view, of course, Shinzo Abe played a pivotal role of introducing the free and open Indo-Pacific, one of the main pillars of the 5 pillars of the Indo-Pacific strategy. In the US, I think from 2011, the discussions, as well as in many papers, there was reference to Indo-Pacific. But when it comes to Obama regime, I think it was the Asia-Pacific rebalance, which slowly evolved into the Indo-Pacific and the Indo-Pacific strategy. So if you look at the recent 2022, the last year, national security strategy, out of the 48 pages, 32 times Indo-Pacific is mentioned. So it is the key strategy of the United States, where Secretary Anthony Blinken, he clearly says that this is the strategy of is the main strategy of the United States, and the next century will be decided from the Indo-Pacific arena, and there are clear references on this, basically from Kurt Campbell from the White House, as well as many others. So the 2/3 of the economy is clearly in the Indo-Pacific, the next basically, as well as the half the population of the world is in the Indo-Pacific. Although it's a mental map, the 2 large oceans, it goes back before Shinzo Abe to the Second World War. It's a German geopolitical construct by Karl Haushofer. The idea of the US is basically mainly on the 5 pillars. The first is the free and open Indo-Pacific. The second is the Quad, and then the AUKUS, which is Australia, UK, and the United States. Then you have the new initiative, which is the Blue Pacific initiative, to focusing on the Pacific arena. So mainly alliance building. And the third area is on the IPEF, which is a very important area in the Pacific economic framework, where they focus on bringing standards to infrastructure, as well as supply chains, fighting corruption. So that's the third. And the fourth area is basically on security. I think when Prime Minister Abe spoke about initially, he also mentioned about the importance of securing the sea lines of communications. And this is really important for countries like Sri Lanka, when it comes to Solomon Islands right now, and the different theaters you see that being threatened, because in the Sri Lankan case, basically in the Indian Ocean, where the larger 60% of the global energy supplies travel in these sea lines of communication. So this is another important area on maritime security. And the last is, of course, the transnational security. So all 5 areas basically United States has sort of doubled up on the during the Biden administration, and you see AUKUS, Quad, all that, the tremendous focus from White House, and there are, I would say, it was sometime back a very passive, strategy, but then it has now become very active in different theaters.
Thank you, Asanga. Next, I want to hear from the ambassador. We know, of course, India plays a very important role in the Indo-Pacific strategy. Can you tell us how is India's attitude toward this strategy, and what kind of role does Prime Minister Modi think India should and can play into it?
Yes, thank you very much, Paris. And let me also thank the Global Strat for getting us all together to discuss this very important subject of the Indo-Pacific and the future of the Indo-Pacific. So the way in which India looks at this strategy or this vision is that the center of gravity, whether it's economic, political, security, population-wise, etc., has been gradually moving from the transatlantic to the Indo-Pacific. And it is over the last 10, 15, 20 years during this last 2-3 decades, it has moved very decisively to the Indo-Pacific. Now, India is the 5th largest economy in the world. It will become possibly the 3rd largest. That's what many of the analysts, whether it's McKinsey or Bloomberg, they suggest that it'll become the 3rd largest by the beginning of the next decade. It is the fastest growing major economy in the world, with 7% GDP growth last year. So India is destined to play a significant role as far as the evolution of the Indo-Pacific is concerned going forward. As I said, initially, we consider it as a geographical sort of a construct, not a strategy, and it extends its, we call it a vision. And you would recall that many of the others also who have come out with the papers on Indo-Pacific, they also name it either as guidelines or vision or policy or something, not necessarily calling it a strategy, because not giving the impression that the countries would be getting together for some particular purpose. So we consider that it extends from the east of Africa to the west coast of USA. So it includes the Pacific Island states and all the water bodies and all the countries in between. India is, of course, committed to a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific, as well as ASEAN centrality and unity, because ASEAN connects the 2 main oceans, Indian and Pacific Oceans. India is also committed to upholding the rules-based international order, underpinned by the rule of law, transparency, freedom of navigation and overflights in the international seas, respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty, and peaceful resolution of disputes. In fact, we think that the Indo-Pacific construct is really a reassertion of history, because you would recall, whether it is millennia ago or several millennia ago, there was no distinction between the Indian and the Pacific Oceans. There was seamless travel and movement, whether it was trade, it was ideas, it was people, it was spirituality, it was religion. In fact, Buddhism traveled from India via the Indo-Pacific to Japan, China, and to all the others. The final point I would make here, what India considers, that the Indo-Pacific and the related waterways should be multipolar and not dominated by a single country or power. So these are the concepts that India holds dear when we speak and discuss about the Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm glad that you mentioned ASEAN, because that's segueing into our next guest, Joyce Ling, Professor Ling. Now, you are an expert on Southeast Asian politics and countries. So, of course, we know the Southeast Asian countries constitute a large part of this Indo-Pacific region also includes some areas that might have controversy, such as South China Sea. The investor talking about the freedom of navigation. What are the views of Southeast Asian countries, particularly ASEAN, on this Indo-Pacific strategy? And also, I know you have knowledge on the South Korea. Can you also talk about South Korea's view on this strategy? Thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank Paris to invite the four distinguished guests here. And as we know, I think the most Southeast Asia countries not only welcome China's One Belt, One Road, but also the United States Indo-Pacific Strategy. Because these two forces have a balanced effect, which is equivalent to the hedging strategy of Southeast Asia countries. So we can divide the 10 ASEAN member states into 3 levels. The first level, I think, will be like Singapore and Vietnam, and also the Philippines, because these 3 countries, they keep good relations with United States, and they are all support the Indo-Pacific. And we can also find that before, like the former Philippine president, like Rodrigo Duterte, he is not so approved of United States. But then the new president, Bongbong Marcos, they change. He has obviously changed his attitude to the United States. And I think the second level would be like Indonesia and Thailand. These 2 countries, they try to keep more neutral status, because like Indonesia, he looks as a big fish in a small pond, and US and China are both still like opportunity and threat. So they try to keep more neutral. And then like the 3 countries, Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia, because they I think they are more closer to the China PRC. So they would like to, I think, keep a little distance from the United States, and they are not so support the Indo-Pacific strategy, because I think like the ambassador just mentioned, ASEAN centrality, and they don't want to have any military force, military practice, and like a better word in this country and this region. I think that's all. Thank you.
Joyce, can you talk about South Korea just for?
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
And we know both president like Wen Jiaying and Yin Xiyue, they all have their new Korean Indo-Pacific strategy, and they also want to cooperate with the United States and like the neighboring countries, Japan and some European countries, and they can have some deal with another outer big powers, and keep this very careful. And I think want to keep the regional security and the future prosperity, and then they think they can work together in this region. So I think that these 2 Korean presidents, maybe they have a little different attitude, but I think in the big part, they can have support on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. So I'm going back to Masa. Of course, we all talk, Ambassador and Joyce will talk about neutrality. And earlier you talk about when Shinzo Abe have the Indo-Pacific in mind, China was a big factor into it. And I know that you was the China correspondent living in Beijing for years, to speak fluent Mandarin. Can you tell us what is China's reaction to this strategy, although some countries said we are not targeting China?
There's no doubt that China is watching Japan's every move carefully. As you know, CCP is very sensitive to the possibility that they might be encircled by their enemies. Japanese Prime Minister Kishida, who took over Abe's Indo-Pacific Strategy, revised the national security strategy document late last year. This was a historic and unprecedented shift in national security strategy for Japan. It calls for an increase in defense spending to 2% of GDP and the possession of counter-attack capability to strike missile launch sites of adversaries. And then the new strategy positioned China as the greatest strategic challenge ever faced by Japan. I would say that Japanese government has fully aligned itself with the United States on its perception of China. Of course, China criticizes Japan for sticking to Cold War thinking or undermining the foundation of Japan-China relations and something like that. However, I feel that China's aggressive stance toward Japan is more restrained and controlled than I had imagined. I think there are several possible reasons. Beijing fears that Japan, the United States, and Europe will unite to deter China's actions. So perhaps they are watching to see how Japan actually behaves based on the new strategy. Or probably Beijing thinks it's not in its best interest to push Japan too far away because the relations with the United States are not going well. And in this context, I'd like to one more important point. I believe that Japan must explore the following as another significant goal of its Indo-Pacific strategy. That is the stability of Japan-China relations is indeed a strategic interest for Japan. We must not forget this. Of course, to maintain stability, we must deter Beijing from forcing Taipei to do anything against Taiwan people's will. In other words, stability in the Taiwan Strait is in Japan's strategic interest. And that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Masa. We got a question here. It said, what about China's attempts to coerce the other Indo-Pacific nations through debt trap diplomacy and make inroads into African nations to counter the Indo-Pacific efforts such as Quad and AUKUS? Actually, I will have Asanga talk about that actually, which is kind of related to our next question. We all know that United States and China had a very delicate and tense relationship right now. So where do you see this Indo-Pacific strategy leading these relations to? And of course, we see during Obama years, like you said, there was the pivot to Asia, there was a rebalancing Asia, but we also see China had already built artificial islands on South China Sea used by the Chinese military. So will this strategy be able to do what the President Biden always said, to allow the United States to outcompete with China? And also, we want to merge with the question that we just received. It seems that China also have attempt to coerce other Indo-Pacific nations through the debt trap diplomacy and also into other African nations, which the United States also competing with China. Asanga.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And yes, definitely there is significant pressure that I have seen, basically for the last couple of years, starting from the pandemic, where China shifted its diplomatic posture to wolf warrior style diplomatic maneuvers in different geographical theaters. So if I take three particular areas in this Indo-Pacific construct, the Solomon Islands in the Pacific, Cambodia, the military base, which was signed and in Sri Lanka. There are three clear examples of Chinese belligerent behavior in acquiring geoeconomic objectives, basically pushing the geoeconomics to achieve the geopolitical objectives, which has threatened the US as well as the like-minded allies, who sort of sees this as a significant national security threat, and that's a clear projection in these three examples that I've given you. So Biden administration has, of course, allocated 1.8 billion for the financial year 2023. Out of that, 600 million is for Central and South Asia, which I think is still not adequate when you're looking at this alliance that such as Quad and AUKUS and the Pacific has been developed. It requires more investment. Opening up embassies like in Solomon Islands are just initial steps. Maldives is going to have its first embassy, US embassy in the Maldives. Now, the strategic importance of Maldives, the 180 small island chain, in sitting between these sea lines of communication, where China has managed to come in with the debt trap diplomacy, is very clear. What you see is like there is a change of narrative starting from the COVID time and up to now, that this debt trap is being debunked by not only China, pro-China think tanks, but also in the Western think tanks. But it is incorrect. The views that which I have basically captured in Sri Lanka, there is a clear debt trap in countries like Sri Lanka, where China has signed for 99 years. The opaqueness of these agreements, the loans are not transparent. There are multiple questions on the Sri Lankan economic crisis, which how much China was there. China is not the only concern, but it is a considerable issue in the Sri Lankan crisis. So I think this would sort of where I think one would need to understand what are the other countries that would sort of face the similar sort of economic challenge like Sri Lanka. I would see sort of a red flag on Pakistan, the large amounts of borrowings. Then again, there's no returns from these massive borrowings. So the question is appropriate. More than a debt trap, I see a strategic trap. And the strategic trap comes in three areas, which is on political support, the CPC support to the political parties, the human rights support for those countries at the Geneva from China, and then the military and the security. So those are the three dangerous areas that I see.
Thank you, Asanga. You talk about the debt trap, the One Belt and One Road. Of course, we know inside of the Indo-Pacific Strategy, there's President Biden had the Build Back Better World, and which didn't pan out in the Congress, and he has other strategies right now. But like you said, the United States is working with the G7 and other allies to compete with that globally. So I think that we'll see how that works out. Next question I want to ask Ambassador. We all know that China and India, just like United States and China, has many areas that cooperating, but also have conflict. Especially, there is controversy that the military conflicts at the border of India and China as well. And China certainly is not happy that His Holiness Dalai Lama is living in India. So there's a lot of disagreements between the two countries. So what can India use this strategy to recalibrate its relationship with China, Ambassador?
Yes, thank you very much, Paris, for this very interesting question. So first, on the issue of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he's been living in India from 1959, when at the age of 18, he fled from Tibet and he sought asylum, and he's been living in India since that time. He is a respected religious leader as far as India is concerned. He has a huge following in India. He is considered to be a messenger of peace, love, happiness. he does not pursue or undertake any political activities. And so all these epithets that are given, like China calls him a splittist or a malevolent politician, etc. I think these are quite uncalled for and inaccurate, because I think what His Holiness wants and what the Tibetans want is not a split or a separation from China, but in fact, a genuine autonomy to preserve the Tibetan language, culture, and traditions. Now, as far as relations between India and China are concerned, I think we are going to come to the economic and trade relations subsequently. But speaking about the relations on the boundary between the two countries, the problem is we do not have a settled boundary. And while India has tried for a very long time to exchange maps and to settle the borders, China has not agreed, and basically it wants to keep the boundary question open so that it can apply pressure on India. For the last, after there was a war in 1962, after that the relations were frozen for a while, but then it was decided in the late 80s and 90s, and a number of confidence building measures agreement were signed. It was decided basically that we would pursue relations on other issues like trade, economy, political, cultural, people-to-people contact, etc., in one particular stream, and we will keep discussing the boundary question, the border question. So that went on. There were about 5-6 agreements signed. But suddenly in 2020, when the whole world was afflicted by COVID, we had the Chinese bringing forward about 50,000 troops, and very many of their armory and sophisticated war machines and equipment and aircraft very close to the border between the two countries. That led to a conflict, and in which, after a period of 50 years, when there had been no casualty at all on between India and China, India lost 20 of its soldiers in June of 2020. And China has not shared the number of soldiers that it lost, but there are different accounts from America. The account was that about 65 Chinese soldiers were killed. From the Russian news agency TASS, it said that 45 Chinese soldiers were killed. But be as it may, the relations between China and India at the moment are frozen. There are discussions that take place both at the diplomatic level as well as at the military level for de-escalation and disengagement on the border, but it has not happened so far. Now, last words on this. Of course, if we have to deal with China on the 3,488 kilometer of our border with China, of course, we have to do it ourselves, and we are doing all that is required in terms of building up our defense capabilities, building up our infrastructure in the border areas, increasing our domestic production of weaponry equipment. But where the Indo-Pacific strategy comes in is in terms of having the external balancing to not exactly to contain China, but to balance China so that it emerges as a responsible global international player. That having been said, I think we also need to mention that Indo-Pacific strategy and the Quad construct, they are not merely security aspects. They are, as my Prime Minister has called the Quad, it is a force for global good. We are discussing a large number of areas like distribution of vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines to the Indo-Pacific countries, developing of critical and emerging technologies, discussing climate change, development of infrastructure, education, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief. So basically, we are working on all these aspects which would be of benefit and advantage to the people of the Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. We got a question here. We actually can talk about it later, but it's just sort of related to the next question I want to ask Professor Ling. So the question is, Canada has also come out with an Indo-Pacific strategy, and Europe has also been getting more involved in the Indo-Pacific military exercises. Do you feel that China will try and break the combined efforts of all these nations to ensure a free and fair Indo-Pacific? So this is actually what I want to ask Professor Ling. We see when President Biden went over to Europe, this is ever the first time NATO has NATO's next 10-year strategy has Indo-Pacific built into it. And even when he went to different countries, joint statement will include peace and stability of the Taiwan Strait. And we see the US Navy ships go through the Taiwan Strait quite often, but also other countries as well, including we see the Canada, Australia, some European nations as well. So from a Taiwan standpoint of view, what is Taiwan's role in this the grand Indo-Pacific strategy?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks to China, and we all know Taiwan has not already joined the TPP and ASEAN so far. So we all know it's a very unfair to Taiwan. And then we can try to play, I believe, enthusiastic member and a very loyal supporter to Indo-Pacific strategy, because just as a U.S., I think as a State Secretary Blinken said that Taiwan's economy is not only an issue of China's internal affairs. If Taiwan economy collapses, then it may have a very worst and devastating effects on the U.S. and the global economy. So we can imagine if Taiwan can play very good, I think, player, and we can help some like semiconductor and some very good updated or the I think the IT industry, and then we can find some another opportunity. And I think recently the U.S. Taiwan initiate on the 21st threat just have I think concluded I think last month, and then Taiwan can I think has a good partner with all the big powers, and then in the future Taiwan can become a part of this very important institutional arrangement, just as TPP and ASEAN, and also like I mentioned, U.S. Taiwan initiate on the 21st century threat in the future. I think that will be better than before. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. I see Ambassador has something he wants to comment. Ambassador.
Yeah, I have a question, Paris. I have a question to Professor Lin, because she mentioned that that China has been instrumental in blocking Taiwan's entry into RCEP and CPTPP. Now,
Yeah.
RCEP I can understand because China is a member there, but CPTPP, China is not a member. So why do you say, or how do you think China would be instrumental in blocking Taiwan's entry into that organization? Thank you.
Yes, China factor has yeah, I think bound and locked all the Taiwan's opportunity to join any international organization. And then we can understand in the future, maybe like India or United States and Japan can help Taiwan to join this international and regional institution arrangement in the future, because Taiwan now is very important important role. I think in the even in the East and the West world, I think we can understand, and so many people worry about the future if Taiwan can be emerged into China, I mean a PRC, and then it's very dangerous and it will damaged. It's a very crisis, a big crisis in this region. So we can also work together to have some, I think, have some cooperation, and we can join all the democratic and liberal countries in this region to work together and help each other. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Ling. Next up, I'm glad that you guys all start talking about the economic side of the Indo-Pacific strategy. So next question I want to ask Masa. We know that President Biden announced the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework at Tokyo last year in May, but he also emphasized he has no intention of returning to the CPTPP, which is the new version of the TPP. So in Japan's view, can the economic framework replace the CPTPP? And can Japan benefit from the economic framework in terms of competing with China's economic influence in the region?
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's a good question. Well, regional economic frameworks are like international public goods. So, Japan will not give up until the last minute on the United States returning to CPTPP. But given the situation in the US Congress, it's hopeless. Everybody knows that. And IPEF is certainly less engaging than CPTPP. In particular, IPEF does not involve market access. So there will be fewer incentives for emerging Asian countries. Still, it is very, very important that the Indo-Pacific region have a framework in which the United States commits to regional rule-making in key areas such as the digital economy and resilient supply chains. It's always better to have something than nothing. So this is because the national security framework alone cannot paint the picture of a prosperous future for the region. So we definitely need an economic strategy. As you know, the US has a basic tendency toward economic isolationism. So both Republicans and the Democrats are essentially America first. So that's why we need a platform to keep the US tied to the Indo-Pacific region. That's the significance of IPEF, in my opinion. And I also believe that Japan's presence will become more important than ever. Economic partnership frameworks in this region include CPTPP and IPEF, as well as RCEP, Quad, and APEC, which have a multi-layered structure. So Japan is a major economic power participating in all these frameworks. So Japan has an important role and a huge responsibility in the region's rule-making process. I believe that our Indo-Pacific strategy presents a framework for international cooperation that many countries are strongly looking for. So the bottom line is that we must strive to build a regional order based on rules. I think this will benefit not only the region, but also Japan. Thank you.
Thank you, Masa. Next, I want to ask Asanga, since we're on the IPEF discussion, do you, in your research, is this IPEF sufficient in competing with China? Especially we see that countries like Sri Lanka participated in China's One Belt and One Road. We talked about that earlier, and didn't see its economic benefit from it. Can countries like that benefit from IPAF, and what is the economic aspect of the Indo-Pacific strategy?
Thank you for that question. First of all, I agree with Masahiro. It is about setting rules-based order. And what is lacking in the last several years was the rules being altered by China in nations like China, in Sri Lanka and Cambodia, Myanmar, Kwakfu. So many other places, China start, establishing their first military base in Djibouti. They acquired an economic zone in Sri Lanka during the COVID time without any public participation or debate in the parliament, a massive economic zone in the heart of Colombo. It got, not only acquiring it, they got extra-jurisdictional rights in this zone. One of the best examples I can give you is the spy ship visit, which happened a few months ago in Sri Lanka, the Huang 5. While New Delhi signaled Colombo, Sri Lanka, saying that not to invite this ship, Sri Lankan regime initially said that they would not invite, but then they couldn't deny China. And the ship arrived to their Hambantota port, which was built by China and leased for 99 years. So IPEF can improve the processes basically on transparency, opaqueness. None of the Sri Lankan general public has seen the 99-year lease. It is only for the eyes of several government officials. This is not fair. I mean, the public is asking, they want to see these documents, what has been signed with China. There should be transparent process. IPEF can bring that. When I read the IPEF, coming back from a country like Sri Lanka, it actually gives some solutions to improve the processes. Then the corruption, the large amounts of corruption in Sri Lanka from predatory loans that has come into the country and then has not has no due diligence and there's no economic benefits. So I've done a comparative work with Sri Lanka and Solomon Islands in the Pacific. This is published in my new book, The Teardrop Diplomacy. I see basically parallels that's happening. The security agreements that they're trying to, China is trying to establish in Solomon Islands is the same thing that is seen in Sri Lanka. So the Pentagon's identifying Hambantota port, basically could be a logistics base is absolutely correct. So the strategic dimension has to be understood, and IPEF can definitely strengthen these projects, because none of these projects can be taken back. Several governments did try to intervene, they couldn't. None of these projects could be investigated. So the previous regime, as well as the regime before in Sri Lanka, tried, but they failed. The reason is the largeness of the Chinese presence and the influence that they have in these islands. So that has to be understood. And IPEF is definitely a way forward and would strengthen, the processes of these countries.
Thank you. Next, I want to ask Ambassador, since India plays India is a very big economy in the world, but also China is India's second largest trade partner in 2022. And both China and India are part of BRICS. So what is India's position in this, economic tug of war and, the IPEF and the grand scheme of things, Ambassador?
Yeah, thank you very much, Paris. So you're right. China is India's second largest trading partner. The largest is the United States, but the difference is not all that much. But in terms of the construct, the architecture of India-China trade is something similar to what the US-China trade relationship is like. It is highly imbalanced. There's a huge trade deficit against India, and it's been like this over the last many years. And we have been taking up with China that this is an unsustainable trade deficit and needs to be improved. But nothing much has happened, meaning if I could give you an example, the two-way trade is in the range of about $100 billion, out of which about 80 billion or so are Chinese exports to India, and about 15-20 billion dollars are India's exports. There are huge non-tariff barriers against Indian products, and there is discrimination against Indian products. So we've been discussing this, but no fruitful results. There have been, of course, demands for in India also for bringing down these imports in the past, and particularly after the clashes that took place in Galwan in June 2020, in which I had mentioned earlier, 20 of our soldiers died. And there was demand from the people in India that we need to bring down our imports from China, but in the absence of because of our commitments under the World Trade Organization, under the WTO, legally, officially, nothing has been possible. But on the trade front, but as far as India banned several apps from China, we also banned the entry of Huawei. The investments from China which were coming in were restricted. One comment, if I could give on the BRI, when the Belt and Road Forum took place in 2017, I think June of 2017, India was the only country that refused to participate in that Belt and Road Forum. Although there were lots of, there was cajoling, there was persuasion, there was even sort of veiled, well, I'll not say threats, but it was stated that the whole world is coming there and India will be isolated, but still we did not go. And the reason was exactly the same problems. We said that all these projects are economically not viable, they are not sustainable, and they will lead to huge debt traps because they have not been discussed with the recipients. And that is what has unfortunately happened. And I think after so many years, many countries are getting wise to it. But this is what we had mentioned even at that time. But coming back to China-India trade relations, so we have restricted many of the investments that were coming from China. So today, I think the investments have come down very significantly, but trade is still high and it is skewed. But still, China wants to restore the business as usual. We had the Chinese foreign minister coming to India, visiting India last year in March, and he wanted to give the impression that everything is sorted out on the border, so there should be, we should restore our business relations, but that has not happened. And so we have to basically look at what we are getting from China, whether we can get from other countries. We can start manufacturing them within our own country. One, of course, aspect of the weaponization of the supply chains that China resorted to during the COVID period is that much of the new investment that would have gone to China is not going there, it's going to other countries. And India is also receiving a considerable amount of that investment. So that is some result of Chinese activities. Some of the investment is also going to Malaysia, to Vietnam, to Bangladesh also, but India is also a recipient. Now, the last word, what you mentioned about the trade war between the United States and China. I think, as I mentioned, the United States also has a huge trade imbalance, about $500 billion of trade deficit. So, and it is quite clear to everyone, and I used to be in the WTO, I've negotiated, I used to be on the panel to discuss China's entry into the WTO. So China has been gaming the WTO since it entered the organization in 2001. So I think it's natural for countries like the US who have had to face the adverse impact to respond in action. China has also been forcibly stealing US technology, so it's so restrictions have been placed on export of US technology like advanced computing, supercomputing, semiconductor capabilities. All of that has been put under restriction because it is detrimental to US national security and foreign policy interests. So this, the United States has determined in its own consideration, and I think any country is within its power to take action if its national security interests are impinged. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. We only have a few minutes left, so last question, I want to give it to Professor Ling. Of course, Taiwan has, you mentioned before, Taiwan has a very strong semiconductor industry. We see President Trump attended Foxconn's investment. President Biden went into TSMC's investment in the United States. But at the same time, yesterday we saw was the February 24th, the 1-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Secretary Blinken, in his interview to The Atlantic, said, you know, Japan, countries like Japan and South Korea, which are far from Europe, are paying attention and participating in the support of Ukraine because they see how this war can affect the whole world, including the Indo-Pacific, including possibly crisis in Taiwan. So, Professor Ling, I wanted to talk about Taiwan's economic power and how important it is, and the lessons that Taiwan and the countries in the Pacific region can learn from Ukraine war.
Thank you. Very good question. It's very ironically because all the ASEAN member states, 10, you can see there have been 7 ASEAN member states to be the first round of IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, besides Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos. And so many people in Taiwan, they want to understand why was Taiwan not included in the first round of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework? Because Taiwan not only cannot into the CPTPP and IPEF, and so many others important regional and international organizations, we cannot join as well. So I think China factor is like a troublemaker, and I think most people in Taiwan, everyone now is very worrying about the Taiwan Straits crisis in the future. So I do believe all the democratic alliance will be together, get to deal with the very important China factor. And we all know Taiwan's new southbound policy, we can have our growth ability and our semiconductor power, and we can have some good cooperation, not only in Asia, but also like we can join some big power like India, Japan, South Korea, and Australia, like Quad, and the others big power. And then I do believe all the democratic and liberal countries in the world, we can help each other, and we can have a good and a better prosperous future in this region, not only in East Asia, but also other places and in the world. I think it's a very good, scenario. Thank you.
Professor Ling, just 30 seconds, very quickly. So there's a saying, it says, you know, today is Ukraine, tomorrow Taiwan. So this the Ukraine war, just yesterday was the 1-year anniversary. Does that bring attention to Taiwan in the Indo-Pacific region? 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think every country they can also pay attention to Taiwan's issue, and in the future, Taiwan is not the part of China, and then all the ASEAN member states and all the east and I think southeast and northeast country, or not only Japan and South Korea, and we all know Taiwan can help other countries like in Turkish. Yeah, I think last month, and we can have our very enthusiastic and very good, I think, thinking and the actions, and that we can work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ling. And thank you all the panelists that joined us today on the Global Strategies discussion in the Pacific Strategy, and everyone who are watching and asking questions, participating online. Also, thank you very much. And we'll have it was a very good discussion. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Paris.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Paris.
Thank you, Professor Len. Thank you, Masa. Thank you, Asanga.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, it's okay to leave.
I think, no, I mean, we're still live.
Yes, but we're not broadcasting and it's not recording. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. That was a
Thank
great-
you very, yeah,
great
it was a
discussion.
great discussion. You just I wish we had 2 hours. There's so many things to talk about, but thank you very much, Masa-san.
Thank you for your help. Thank you.
Enjoy.
You
Nice
have a
meeting
good
you.
weekend, everybody. Bye.
Have a good weekend. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.